everybody. Your natural dog with Angela Ardolino here. And you know how I like to geek out on cannabis and mushrooms and adaptogens, and I could talk about them all day long. Well, my guest today, Jaron Lukas of YumWoof, is going to do that with me about coconut oil and MCT oil and super fats and which ones are good for dogs, which ones are bad, how to stay away from seed oils and things like that. You're going to love this episode. Stay tuned. Your natural dog and my guest, Jaron Lukas, and you have created your own dog food company.
Yeah, we launched YumWoof 2.5 years ago. We were in product development for a year before that. And anyone who knows me knows how obsessive I get about our formulations. And so they take a long time. We're on V2 of all of our products, but everything we do at YumWoof is non-GMO, air-dried dog food, low carb, no peas, legumes, rice, potatoes, really focused on taking research from microbiome diversity and kind of like looking at that as our barometer that we're always trying to achieve through our recipes. So it'll be as of no surprise to anyone who has read my book that there are certain fats we don't use in our food, namely seed oils, which are very common in pet food. And then there are different types of fats that we found can have really amazing health benefits for reducing inflammation in dogs. And so I call them Coco-Mega super fats, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna talk about today are super fats. And I think it's cool because I remember when I learned about the endocannabinoid system and how basically it's fat communicating in our body. And when I learned that I had to, if I wanted a dog to be able to absorb a full spectrum hemp extract, that one of the best things I could put it in is a coconut oil or an MCT oil. And you've written a whole darn book about it, which is pretty incredible. So I want to say it's incredible that you've completed a fantastic book on this subject and that you've created a food, an amazing food. And I always think I can't imagine creating a food, but I know where you come from because I went to school. I learned about the endocannabinoid system in cannabis and then turned around and tried to find what product I could give my dog and couldn't find it and ended up creating it. I'm going to guess the same thing happened to you where you were literally going, if we know this, then why isn't there a food that is supplying it? Is that kind of what happened?
Yeah, definitely. And I was very surprised to not find very much dog food before starting the company that had coconut oil. My research into this topic has gone up 100-fold since launching the company, and it's all kind of summarized in my book. But I think in the early days when we were launching Perfect Kibble, which despite the name is an air-dried dog food, I was just so confused, like, why are there so many seed oils in dog food? And that's like a longer topic that also has to do with cost and industry regulations. To formulate a dog food without them is actually more difficult than you would think. But that's something we did. Like, dogs definitely don't need seed oils in order to survive and especially not thrive. They're very high in omega-6. So just to start, like in human nutrition, you always hear people talk about omega-3s, and you rarely ever hear people talk about the benefits of omega-6s. Oddly enough, in the pet food industry, people are just always talking, like in Facebook comments and on Reddit, people are oddly talking about the benefits of omega-6s. And I started to ask myself, why is this happening? And it turns out that a lot of the major pet food brands, the big names like Purina and brands like that, have written a bunch of articles talking about the benefit. It's like literally titled "The Benefits of Omega-6s." And so a lot of people read these articles and then they just repeat what they've read on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
And so unfortunately, it's like dogs are biological creatures just like humans. And actually,
Amen.
omega-3s and omega-6s operate the same way. So when you look at and this is something I talk about in my book, The Canine Cocoa Omega Effect, so AAFCO's industry requirements for omega-3s to omega-6s is 1 to 30, meaning your dog can eat 30 times more omega-6s than 3s. You want to normally try to achieve a 1-to-1 ratio, so that's pretty far off. Most dry kibbles are at closer to a 1 to 16 ratio, so still very far off. And actually, that's basically the same ratio as American fast food. So we're pretty much just feeding our dogs fast food every day in the form of dry kibble. There are all sorts of other problems with dry kibble, just in the way it's made, stuff like that. But, the first thing we can do for our dogs is just, like we've explored across many, many studies, getting that balance right. Omega-6s cause the production of inflammatory molecules like PGE2 and cytokines. It's not just like a made up kind of like woo-woo thing. It's like actually they just like biochemically transform in our bodies and our dogs' bodies into inflammatory chemicals. And so the best way to inhibit those is to just get the omega-3s higher. So talk a lot about that in my book, and the benefits that adding coconut oil, because it has MCTs and lauric acid in it, there's very recent, incredibly interesting research showing how if you add coconut oil to omega-3s, it'll actually boost the omega-3s effectiveness. It has all sorts of other benefits for the microbiome, particularly microbiome diversity, which is associated across all studies with longevity. So, extrapolate from that, also like reduce cancer rates, reduce disease, all the bad things, reduced obesity, also that. But like it is just across all microbiome research, we tend to use microbiome diversity as like a basic biomarker to look at because it is so correlated to longevity. And that's one of the really cool things that this Cocoa Mega effect kind of helps extrapolate and grow.
And the reason that they're not using the coconut oil most likely is because it is more expensive, and they are using the seed oils because they're cheaper.
That is definitely a main reason. So going deeper into it, AAFCO, who's the industry regulator in the US, does have minimum omega-6 requirements. So like to meet those requirements, you can meet it through things like meat. However, you just look at all the fake ingredients that dog food brands tend to use, and then they tend to use a lot of high carb fillers. So they're reducing the protein amounts. These are all things that like my brand has been very much fighting against. Like that's why our recipes are low carb. It's why, having too high carb of a diet is also inflammatory. So,
right.
We try to balance these things in our own way, but at a minimum, you have AAFCO's omega-6 minimum amounts. So to get there for a lot of brands, they have to boost it with things like sunflower oil, safflower oil, if they're really bad, canola oil, Purina. So, but those aren't necessary. It just means that we're not using enough amounts of the right ingredients. And so in addition to that, then you have other fats like salmon oil, fish oil, flaxseed oil, and, coconut oil. All of these are really shown to be beneficial in terms of, there are definitely people out there who will debate me on coconut oil. coconut oil is, especially the MCTs and the lauric acid, and a lot of people even debate over
what's the problem with what's the problem with MCT? I didn't hear that. I know about, and I would love to address that, at the end of the podcast. But what's the issues with the MCTs?
Well, I think a lot of people, one, extrapolate human nutrition onto dogs. So maybe a concern in human nutrition with MCTs if you're taking it. So like with the amounts I would talk about for humans, because the cocoa mega effect also works in humans, and there's research to back that. Basically, my book cites 162 clinical studies supporting my thesis here. So with MCTs, the MCTs are a saturated fat. So for people who are more prone to heart risk, like that might be a consideration that they would take into account. But it also really depends on how much MCT you're taking, like the amounts that people are taking on the keto. And I'm someone who was on keto for 2 years previously, but the amounts that people are taking on that versus like just the amounts to kind of like produce this cocoa mega effect are way different. There really isn't even a risk in humans, in my humble opinion. However, with dogs, there are so many studies that have been done on dogs showing that saturated fat doesn't have any sort of negative health implication related to heart disease in dogs. It also kind of makes sense, right? Like even though they are omnivores, they are carnivores by nature. Like they lean carnivore. They always ate high saturated fat diets. In fact, 45% of their total diet in the ancestral world is fat. So fats really shouldn't be that debatable for dogs whatsoever. But like there's one person who's pretty notable in the pet community. I won't call her out here because I think that she and I have like a decently good relationship, even though we could not debate more on this coconut oil. She's the biggest hater. And, one thing I would call out about like her stance is her whole thesis on like some of the potential like dangers to dogs of coconut oil are all based on 4 very small rat studies. So I'm like, okay, like here's 162 studies showing that like overall this is like extremely healthy. And
but that same person went from being the biggest fan to suddenly changing.
Also, no, she was never a fan of coconut oil. She's always
okay. So then I'm thinking of a different person. And I am looking like at it, and I wanted, because I couldn't remember what the controversy. So I'm talking about another person who went crazy on it. And they were the biggest fan, treated all their dogs, loved it, and then turned. And there was other controversy of why they did that. So what is that controversy with the lauric acid? I think is one of them from the 2012 study. Was that the one that I read in your book?
Yeah, well, I
took notes, and now I can't remember where I got everything from. And is that the study that you're referring to and that they keep referring to?
Well, the study, there are different studies that people refer to. In terms of dogs, I cite probably 8 studies. So just to give you a frame of reference, like there were 2 studies done over the last 3 years by Hill's Pet Nutrition that really prove, oddly enough, right? I always joke, and I hope they're one of the best research departments out there. So if they would just like make better food, imagine what could happen.
I know.
But I feel like I've really written a book based on a lot of the research that Hills has done, oddly enough,
and then made a real food.
And we're about to launch another one that incorporates it like even more in a different way. So yeah, Perfect Kibble definitely is kind of like formulated even before I knew about the cocoa mega effect. We were formulating this really based on studies showing that like coconut oil had benefits, omega-3s had benefits, but it's really the research that has been done at Texas A&M as well as Hill's Pet Nutrition that show that combining lauric acid, MCTs, and DHA, a type of omega-3 together, have these synergistic health benefits on each other. And then even further than that, I call in my book I call fiber the carbohydrate superfat because even though it is technically a fiber, even though it's technically a carbohydrate, it converts in the microbiome into short chain fatty acids. And when that happens, and if we can even like enhance that, which does happen when you add the coconut oil to it, then those short chain fatty acids actually increase the absorption of the omega-3s into cells. So all of these things have really interesting synergistic benefits. I think that this whole concept of synergistic ingredients is very new. I think I'm probably one of the first people to write about it. But I think that this is going to be a really interesting area of research over the next 10 years. And,
maybe that's why. Yeah, maybe, and that's why I love you so much, because that's literally what I do with my tinctures, is that I put adaptogens that are synergistic and work towards one thing or another. So it's the same type of thing. It doesn't make sense to me that if we know putting 3 adaptogens together is more powerful than just putting one, then why wouldn't we put 3 together?
Exactly.
Instead of just giving one.
And that really gets into diversity. Like another thing that no research has been done on yet, but is my like personal hypothesis, is that people ask me what type of fiber to feed their dogs. And, obviously there's been research done on things like inulin, even soluble corn fiber is showing positive benefits, oddly enough, as long as it's non-GMO. So, it's really interesting, but I think what we're going to find out over the next 10 years or so is that all these different types of fiber, like if you took apple fiber and compared that to inulin and compared that to like orange fiber and beet pulp fiber, I think we're going to find that all of these produce different types of bacterias in the microbiome. And so the best thing we can do, like you're saying with the adaptogens, is just right now really have a variety of them, and so that we promote ultimately what is going to become microbiome diversity.
Oh, I love it. Totally makes sense. What's the difference between getting an omega-3 from coconut versus salmon?
Well, so coconut is a source more of like MCTs and lauric acid, whereas salmon oil is one source of omega-3s. It is particularly high in DHA. So, another thing is,
could we get that? I don't mean to interrupt, but can we get that? So the theory that I've heard is that instead of eating the salmon, to eat what the salmon eats to get the omegas. So the kelp or the seaweed or whatever.
There's, so this I can't claim is deep in my research, but I know that there are certain types of algae that have omega-3s and seem to be high in DHA from like what I've just looked at with different products. So I would tend to say that they probably are just as good, but I always put that caveat. I would like to see research, and also a lot of times when we get things from plant origin, they absorb at much lower rates than from animal origin. So an example of that might be vitamin K. Like vitamin K1 coming from a plant is going to have about a 10 to 20% absorption rate in the body, whereas vitamin K2 from an animal source is going to have probably more like an 80 or 90% absorption rate. So think about this in terms of formulating dog food. AFCO requirements, if you include sources of vitamin K from like different sources, it could be K1, K2, doesn't really matter. It'll still show as vitamin K and meet AFCO requirements, but the absorption rate might be completely different. So there are all sorts of like very important things that ultimately show that the safest thing we can do is just feed our dog natural food. When we do that, we kind of avoid some of those challenges. And that's one of the things that, I think that Perfect Kibble, we've had a lot of success there in terms of like dogs who have been on Apoquel, like different allergy medicine. We've had success with dogs who like, I'll tell you what, I had a friend come to me, his dog had major constipation. It was going on for weeks at this point. And so originally I was like, yeah, like try Perfect Kibble, man. and he didn't do it. And he's actually like a holistic doctor as well. So he's like big into plant medicine and stuff. Still didn't do it. And so he comes to me a couple weeks later and he's like, dude, like my dog is in a really bad situation. Like, what should I do? And I was like, give your dog perfect kibble, give them the salmon oil, and like, let me know how it goes. And so we like rushed it to him. His dog's constipation was fully healed in 18 hours. So, it's just like, one, if we just get our dogs off of dry kibble, that's such a big start. That's where you see like the majority, like the huge changes, especially happen there. Then after that, I feel like once you're out of that, you're more like looking at raw, fresh, dehydrated or freeze-dried food, or air-dried, which happens to be the best way to cook dog food, in my opinion. Once you're at that stage, you're really optimizing your dog's nutrition. And so from there, like, there are many reasons you may want to like go different directions, but I'm very excited that our upcoming dog food perfect feast, it's actually going to be kind of like a nose to tail diet. And so it's kind of like all the benefits of raw, where you're getting all of the vitamins and minerals from organ meat primarily. But then it's air dried so that you're getting rid of like pathogens, which have negative effects on the microbiome. You're ultimately just like getting all of these benefits. To me, it's like the perfected dog food.
And so air dry, how do you cook a food by air drying it? I love the concept and I think it's wonderful. So you're not HPP. So does that mean it's got all of the good bacteria intact?
Well, I mean, honestly, when you're cooking food, you are trying to get rid of most bacteria. And so that, I don't know that I look at like dog food as being like the primary source of where you want to get probiotics. I think it's like what will naturally provide vitamins and minerals, amino acids, and then it's the base nutrition that can then open up the microbiome to be receptive for bacteria that's naturally around them. So when you think about like, I talk about in the book how this coco-mega effect, specifically because of the lauric acid and how that interplays with everything, that has a probiotic-like effect. So it doesn't have probiotics in it. Like you can always give your dog probiotics. That's like been shown to be broadly beneficial. But instead of like taking bacteria and putting them into our dog's nutrition, we can instead open up space so that like bacteria from the surrounding areas can naturally, kind of enter their digestive tract. And so that's the probiotic-like effect that happens with the coconut from the coco-mega effect. And it's really cool stuff because it ultimately is not just leading to microbiome diversity, because diversity can also have bad in it, right? It just means things are diverse. But what you really want to do is have the bigger percentage of that pie be good bacteria, good families of bacteria, so to speak. And so that's where like the research is being done today. When you look at the like 2023 studies, a lot of it's really starting to identify like what are the good families, what are the bad families. And the cool thing is that like, all of these show that omega-3s and coconut oil together produce like more good families. And so, you're really, that's the way I look at kind of like structuring a microbiome. And the most important, like this can be beneficial for all dogs, all humans, all ages, all sizes, literally. But the best time to start is when your dog is a puppy. In that first 18 months of a dog's life, that's when the microbiome is being set. The same goes for humans. I don't know the exact date range on us, but as a baby, as a child, as we expose ourselves to things that promote microbiome diversity, like more good bacteria. So like eating probiotics earlier in life or giving them to your puppy will have effects that literally last the rest of their life, unlike if we start giving them in old age. Like they'll still have a benefit, but if you stop feeding them, they'll lose their effectiveness in 3 days. So It's very cool stuff, especially if you start early.
That is incredible. Is there a problem? Can a dog get too much? So I'm bringing this up again because I know another vet who has a diet that she's made up, and she was a huge proponent of coconut oil included in her recipe for her diet, for people to make at home. And she took out coconut oil because someone claimed it gave their dog pancreatitis. Can you talk to that? Because that's probably, and of course I hear this. I don't know if you know this. I have 2 brick and mortar stores. I used to go to them all the time, and I used to hear it all the time, with their dog. There's an issue, and the first question I'd ask, what are you feeding? Oh, I'm feeding him. And of course, it would be some sort of awful science diet or something like that. And I would be like, well, let's consider changing the food. Oh, I can't because he's got pancreatitis. So I can't give him anything raw. I can't give him anything fat. And I'm going, my God. And I remember I'd go to my, board of advisors who are mostly integrative and holistic veterinarians. And they'd be like, oh, no.
No, this just gets to all the
bad
vet advice that is out there. And so when it comes to pancreatitis, and I talk to pet parents whose dogs have pancreatitis like probably 5 times a week. I've opened up these calls on our website where people can schedule a nutrition call with me. Anyone who's, watching right now, feel free. If your dog has,
how do they know? How do they know? They're calling you and they say my dog has pancreatitis. How do they know?
Yeah,
they went to the vet and the vet said that.
Yeah, usually by then they've at least gone that far. And so I have these conversations start from all points in the journey. I mean, someone could have a middle-aged dog and they like truly believe in a holistic diet, and they're like absolutely terrified that their vet just recommended Hill's science diet to their dog, because they know that cornmeal isn't going to be the ingredient that makes them thrive. We get everything from that to like people whose dog was just diagnosed with diabetes and pancreatitis, and they're like going blind. By the way, when both of those are combined together, it's called diabetes type 3C. So I see a lot of that. That's like very common in dogs for currently unknown reasons. But so I dove into this while writing my book, because I too was curious about I wanted to answer the question, is coconut oil causing pancreatitis? Does it actually increase the symptoms? And so what we found in the research is that it doesn't really, 90% of this topic is, it doesn't matter what type of diet or what type of fat, I should say, it's how much fat. So a lot of people whose dogs have pancreatitis, I hear about flare-ups for all sorts of reasons, but it tends to be a meal that had 30 or 40 or higher percent fat in it. It tended to be a very high fat meal in general. We can take 97% chicken, very low fat, and we can add 2% fat to that, make that 5% fat, and that's not going to cause a flare-up in pancreatitis. So it's more about the overall level. And then even going further, what the research found is that seed oils may, and I say may because I feel like there needs to be more research done on this topic to really be conclusive about it, but seed oils did show higher causal rates of pancreatitis than other fats, such as animal fat, coconut oil, and omega-3s. And so I think it would be reasonable to assume that the types of fats also probably make a difference. Pancreatitis is a type of inflammation. So if we also think about the difference between an omega-6 versus an omega-3, what are those going to have? How are those going to interplay with each other? The omega-6 is also causing the production of inflammatory molecules. So that's probably not going to do any favors for the pancreatitis incident. Whereas like if we're feeding omega-3s, you know, that may have a protective effect. So again, all these things, like for any dog with pancreatitis, and I do call that out in my book, because that's the one scenario where it's like you really do need to be extra careful on the fat levels. And so you know, I in my book recommend basically like if you can get closer to the ancestral diet. So you know, it really depends on how much protein and fat are in the diet, but around like a 1-to-1, 1.2 to 1. Those are kind of the areas of protein and fat that I would kind of play in with your average dog. That is also probably going to have long-term benefits for reducing the risk of diabetes, which has grown 2x in dogs over the last 20 to 25 years. So that's also a very alarming thing. I talk to so many pet parents whose dogs have diabetes. And so, you know, coconut oil has broadly been shown in dogs and humans to have benefits for both obesity and diabetes, you know, omega-3s as well. And so that's just, I really encourage when people are looking at the amount of fat in their dog's diet, like for instance, Schnauzers typically recommended a lower fat diet. You know, you don't have to go way up to like the 30% of, and when we talk 30%, even that's a little vague, because in the pet industry, we talk about like dry matter basis, which is like a kind of a theoretical number. But when we talk about like maybe having protein and fat aligned, I mean, you can still get 2-to-1 protein to fat, get the right fats in there to produce this coco-omega effect. Like it doesn't really take that much of them, is my point. Like it's actually a fairly small part of their total calories or diet. So if anything, I think that this will generally have a protective effect, like the coconut oil. Both the coconut oil and the omega-3s and the fiber, like I think that what the research would suggest is that this is probably going to have an anti-inflammatory effect. So that's probably going to play in favor of pancreatitis in the right amounts.
So, and depending where you're getting your coconut oil and MCT oil from and how it's grown and processed makes a huge difference. Thank you for answering that. I completely agree with you. I have never had an issue. I use lots of MCT oil and coconut oil. I've had dogs come from everything from coming straight off of kibble to being fed raw, and I've never had any issues. So every time I see or read about this controversy, I'm always trying to understand it, because it never makes any sense, because I've never had an issue, because I don't think it's the issue. We're out of time. I feel like we could talk another hour with you. Thank you for, and what I want people to realize is that you've written a whole book about it. You don't own a coconut farm or a coconut company or product. So I think that you're probably very passionate about it, kind of like how I am with cannabis and fungi, where it's like, these are such amazing natural sources for things that we need so much. So
yeah, you're right, Angela. I really do hate seed oils.
Good. Well, hopefully not hemp seed. Okay.
No, that's actually a point that a lot of people have been bringing up lately, like flaxseed and sesame oil.
There's some good ones
like
out
that.
there.
There are some good ones.
But you hate how they're being used, and that's what I respect and like. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Where can people find out more about you and your food and your book?
Yeah, follow me on Instagram at Jaron Lukas. It's spelled just like it sounds, and that's a joke. Hopefully, we'll have it written out somewhere. And yeah, you can get my book at YumWoof.com or Amazon. Yeah, I encourage everyone out there to connect with me, especially if you have a dog.
Yeah, and maybe you've heard something that was speaking to you that you're going to get some answers from Jaron. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Angela. Such a pleasure.
You bet.